Hi everyone, this is Forbes Flash. We'll talk about some of the biggest news stories from this week. Feels cliche to start out by talking about the weather, but it's so appropriate this week, as many of us here in the US are freezing, literally. Years from now, we'll all talk about where we were during the Polar Vortex of 2019, which brought with it life-threatening cold and wind chills of 75 below. Sorry to everyone in Grand Forks, North Dakota. The upper Midwest was hit with the worst of the chill this week, thanks to that massive Arctic air that drifted down towards the Great Lakes. Temperatures hit at least 20 to 40 degrees below average, with dangerous wind chills that spread east towards the Ohio Valley. The cold also found its way across the Great Lakes and into New England, where I can confirm it's quite brisk out there. The U.S. Postal Service also made the rare move of suspending mail deliveries to parts of 10 states on Wednesday, many on Thursday as well. Our next story might not help with the frigid temperatures outside, but it will warm your heart. It's the story of King Arthur Flour, a company that took the unique step of passing ownership over to its employees back in 2014. The move guaranteed that the company would stay close to its roots in small-town Vermont, but it also turned out to be a healthy strategy for growth. The company's revenue exceeded $140 million in 2018, which is a 12% increase over the previous year. Though they may have the Great British Bake Off to thank for that, a show I highly personally recommend. Being employee-owned means that King Arthur can try new things more often than a public company might, and it also changes the way people view their daily work. So says current co-CEO Suzanne McDowell, quote, "The pride that people bring to their work, whether it's the coffee they're making, the baguettes they're shaping, the boxes they're shipping, is incredible." And now I want to check in on a story we've all been following for weeks now. The government shutdown may be over, but its impact certainly isn't. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the 5-week partial shutdown cost the economy $11 billion due to lost output from federal workers, delayed government spending, and reduced demand. So that's the bad news, but now here's some good. Most of the economic damage is expected to be gradually reversed as federal workers return to their jobs. The shutdown was kicked off, of course, when President Trump demanded funding from Congress for his controversial wall across the Mexican border. The wall was a campaign promise for Trump, so the question is now whether he'll approach 2020 with a renewed promise or switch gears. Speaking of 2020, could we have a billionaire face-off for the presidency? Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz announced, to mixed responses, earlier this week that he is seriously considering running for president. But as far as billionaires go, Schultz and Trump could hardly be more different. The former Starbucks CEO grew up in subsidized housing in Brooklyn. Trump grew up as the son of a rich man who developed buildings not far from the projects where Schultz was raised. Schultz started working at Starbucks back in 1982, when it was just a modest Seattle business. Today, the coffee chain has more than 15,000 stores around the world, and Schultz is worth an estimated $3.4 billion. Trump's father passed on properties to the future president when he was younger, who is now worth $3.1 billion. Different upbringings may explain some of the policy gaps between Republican Trump and Schultz, a lifelong Democrat who says he'd run as a centrist independent. And of course, Trump and Schultz aren't the only ones talking about running in the next election. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris both want to be elected president of the United States in 2020. And while both candidates believe that the federal tax system should be much more progressive than it is today, they vary in their views on how the tax system affects income inequality. With that, they have very different policy solutions. Harris proposes to reduce inequality by significantly cutting taxes for low and moderate income households. Warren, on the other hand, wants to achieve the same goal by raising taxes on the wealthiest households. Neither have proposed a complete plan. Harris doesn't really say how she'd fund her generous tax cuts, and Warren has not been clear about how she'd spend all the tax revenue she'd raise. So we don't know yet which candidate would ultimately do the most for low and middle income households. As more candidates step into the fray, those watching the 2020 race will surely be looking for answers. But enough of politics for now. Let's talk about something less controversial, like Super Bowl 53. Okay, slightly less controversial. So this Sunday, the New England Patriots will take on the Los Angeles Rams in a rematch of the big game from 17 years ago. It's expected to be an exciting one, as it brings an end to one of the most high-scoring seasons in NFL history. To be there in person, it costs an average of $3,861 per ticket. But for those who are headed to Atlanta, the cost of concessions might balance out their ticket price, because they'll only pay $2 for a hot dog, unlike last year's Super Bowl in Minnesota, where the same snack would set you back $15. But I digress. The Super Bowl is about football, not food, right? Or maybe you think it's about commercials. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Enough so that advertisers were willing to pay $5.2 million for a 30-second ad. Seems like a fair cost for getting your spot in front of the 100-ish million people who will tune in to watch. And for those of you who are tuning in to watch Forbes Flash, thank you. I'll see you next week for another batch of the stories you need to know.